Welcome to the 312th dinner meeting of the Economic Club of Chicago. I'd like to offer a special welcome to the children, grandchildren, spouses, and other guests who are here this evening. I'll begin with a few announcements about our upcoming programs. Our next forum will be held January 10th at this hotel. William Daley will moderate a panel on China's role in the global economy. Bill has had extensive experience working with and in China, and his current role as chairman of the Midwest region of J.P. Morgan Chase and as the U.S. Secretary of Commerce. The panel will include fellow club member Christopher Galvin, chairman of NAVTEC and the former chairman and CEO of Motorola, and Ted Fishman, author of the international bestseller China Inc. All three speakers have made numerous trips to China and will discuss U.S. business opportunities and challenges in this emerging superpower. Our fourth annual leadership dinners will be held Wednesday, January 18th. If you have not registered or planning to attend, please make your reservations as soon as possible. These are always very popular and often sold out. On February 9th, the Chicago Automobile Trade Association will host us once again for a special preview luncheon of the Chicago Auto Show at McCormick Place. The luncheon speaker will be Tom W. Lasorda, President and CEO of Chrysler Group. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the speakers table. As I call their names, I'll ask each to stand and remain standing until the introductions are completed, and I'll ask you to please hold your applause until all have been introduced. Beginning at my far left, Lasco Ristic, Senior Manager, Deloitte Consulting. Dr. Stephanie Pace Marshall, President, Illinois Mathematics and Science Academy. Blair Hall, Managing Partner, Matlock Capital, LLC. Ron Goldstein, Chairman and Managing Director, Frontman Company. Charlie Robinskoy, Vice Chairman, Aerial Capital Management, and Vice Chairman of the club. Adele Simmons, Vice Chairman, Chicago Metropolis 2020. Ronald Cull, Chairman, Citygate Sark Berlin, and Chair of the Forums Committee. Jim Gordon, Managing Partner and Founder, the Edgewater Funds. Howard Vernon, President and CEO, Alberto Culver Company, and Director of the club. Brenda Gaines, retired President and CEO, Diners Club North America, and Director of the club. David Messina, President and CEO, Museum of Science and Industry. And now from my far right, Deborah B. Walker, Partner, Clausen Miller. Kevin Sheehan, Senior Vice President, GE Asset Management. Joan M. Hall, Chairman and Co-Founder, Young Women's Leadership Charter School of Chicago. Sam Scott, Chairman, President, and CEO of Foreign Products International, Inc., and Director of the club. John C. Barron, Editor-in-Chief of Chicago Sun-Times. Ella D. Struble, Managing Director, Eloquent Design, and Director of the club. John W. McCarter Jr., President and CEO of the Field Museum. Robert S. Murley, Vice Chairman, Credit Suisse First Boston, and Chairman of Investment Banking Americas, and Chair of the Program Committee. Christopher B. Galvin, Chairman, NAVTEC. And now a round of applause for this distinguished group.
Our guest tonight is the kind of man who, when someone says, "I think we're in too deep," replies, "I don't think we're in deep enough." And I mean that quite literally. Dr. Robert Ballard is the Indiana Jones of deep sea exploration and archaeology. He's best known for his 1985 discovery of the Titanic, but he's found all manner of things over the course of his career: 10-foot-long worms that live deep on the ocean floor, underwater volcanoes that can melt lead, and 2 remarkably well-preserved Phoenician ships that were lost in a storm 3,000 years ago. Most of us in the business world consider ourselves explorers or pioneers of some sort. We continually look for new ways of doing things, We use metaphors like navigating uncharted waters. For Dr. Ballard, it's not a metaphor. He was the first to explore the mid-ocean ridge, a mountain range on the bottom of the Atlantic, and he almost lost his life in the process. He discovered hydrothermal vents in the Pacific, and the nature of the animals that live around them has changed the way scientists think about life on our planet. And in addition to the Titanic, he discovered the wreck of the German battleship Bismarck, the U.S. aircraft carrier Yorktown, and the PT-109, President Kennedy's famous patrol boat. But what makes Dr. Ballard such a unique figure, in addition to his discoveries, is his dedication to improving his profession. He's spent over 30 years at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, contributing to the development of technologies that allow researchers to look deeper into the ocean and stay there longer. And at the University of Rhode Island, where he is a professor, he recently created a program in archaeological oceanography and developed the Inner Space Center based on the NASA Command Center model. Using technologies he developed, he revisited the Titanic, bringing back images that have since become iconic. Dr. Ballard also founded the Jason Foundation for Education, which takes hundreds of thousands of school children on live expeditions around the world. And he has become a leading advocate for the health of our planet's oceans. He is an explorer in residence at National Geographic and a best-selling author of more than 20 books. He has received 20 honorary degrees, won an Emmy, and been nominated for an Oscar. He has led or participated in 120 deep-sea expeditions and logged more hours in the deep than any other marine scientist. Directly and indirectly, Dr. Ballard has inspired and helped educate millions of people around the world, and we are indeed very fortunate to have him with us here tonight. So please join me in welcoming our speaker, Dr. Robert Ballard.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Miles. A wonderful, wonderful introduction. And now I'll take questions from here and we're all done. What Miles did, he missed one important thing, one critical thing that he failed to point out, and that is that I was born in Wichita, Kansas, where all oceanographers come from. In fact, it's true. I was born in Wichita, and my grandfather was killed in the gunfight, and my great-uncle is Bat Masterson. So some people think of me as an underwater cowboy, and I like that label really well. But shortly after being born in Kansas, my father was a test flight engineer during the war, and we came out to California. And I actually grew up in California. And that's where I was imprinted, living on the beaches of San Diego. My hero when I was a little boy, and I see a lot of little boys and little girls in the audience, my hero was Captain Nemo. And my parents did not discourage me from my dream. No parent should ever discourage a child from their dream, no matter how funny it may sound. And they encouraged me to pursue my career in undersea exploration. What I'd like to do, in fact, if you could give me that first light, and also, I'm used to working in the dark, so the darker you can make the room, the more comfortable I'll be, and the easier it will be to see the images. I feel like I'm doing Victoria's Secret here. I'm wearing a Canelli tux from Italy, if you'd like. But anyway, I've never had a runway to work on, but this is going to be a new experience this evening. I think I've graduated here in Chicago. But I'm going to take you, what I'd like to do over the next 45 minutes is to take you to my world, to take you into the deep sea in a journey of exploration and discovery. And I hope that after the evening's over, you walk out of the room saying, I didn't know that, and I didn't know that, and I didn't know that. And I hope that when you look out at the ocean the next time you do, you'll look at it in a very entirely different way. Now, for many, many years, as I've been doing deep sea exploration, in my early part of my career, the only way that I could actually get to work was to get in a deep diving submarine like the one we had at Woods Hole, or still is at Woods Hole, the Alvin. And Alvin is a deep diving submarine. It goes to 16,000 feet. The average depth of the ocean is 12,000 feet, so it can get a fair amount of real estate down there. And when you go down, this, you have to realize how small these vehicles are. And let me show you a picture of the inside of our sphere. Now, this was shot with a fisheye lens, so it gives you a much distorted image of what it's like. I'm 6'2", and that sphere, top to bottom, is 6 feet. So that's the hatch. I cannot stand up. So it looks like it's really roomy, but it's not. Now, when you go down in these deep diving submarines, there's 3 people inside. There's a pilot with a great deal of experience, a senior observer also with a great deal of experience. But it's very common when you make a dive to take someone who has absolutely never done it before. And you take them on their first deep sea dive. And that's so much fun because you have this great initiation that you go through. One of them is that there's no bathroom in the submarine. Now, when you're out at sea diving and you're in what we call the dive cycle, you tend to dive every other day. And so when you know you're going to dive the night before, you dehydrate. You don't drink anything, and you don't drink anything in the morning. But you're filling the novice with coffee all morning. And about 45 minutes into the dive, they do have a problem, but I won't go down that road any further. The other thing that's really interesting, and this picture really doesn't show you, is the temperature. See, the submarine is made out of titanium, and so it's sitting on the deck of the ship all morning, and it just gets super hot. And so when you crawl down in the hatch and seal yourself in, the temperature is in the 90s. Not only is the temperature in the 90s, the humidity is in the 90s. So it's basically like crawling inside of a sauna and sealing yourself in, and then having them take the sauna and throw it in a washing machine called the ocean. And what you then do is you're just absolutely uncomfortable. It's extremely hot. You peel off your clothes and you wait. Now, there's an interesting thing that occurs because as you fall down to the ocean bottom, let's say we're going to go 12,000 feet, which is a typical dive. We're going to go down 12,000 feet. It's going to take us 2.5 hours to get down to 12,000 feet. Now, during that free fall, the temperature outside the submarine plummets to where it's near freezing. It gets down to about 4 degrees centigrade, which is a hurtful cold. If you put your hand, absolute hurtful cold. So here's what happens. That the ocean is a gigantic body of water, and it just is like a heat sink, and it just sucks the heat out of your submarine. And your temperature plummets, and you start really trembling. Well, here's what happens. That warm, moist air begins to condense on the hull of the submarine. And give me my slide back. It begins to drip, okay? Now, you know it's going to drip. The pilot knows it's going to drip. It's one of those other things you fail to mention to the novice. In fact, you place the novice directly beneath the hatch, tell him to look out the window, and you wait. Now, in fact, you and the pilot sort of take a side bet on how many drips it's going to take to crack this macho individual. It takes about 8 drips, okay? But it takes 45 minutes for this physics to manifest itself inside the submarine. So by the time the first drip starts to fall on their head, you're down about 5,000 feet. You're about a mile down, and that first drip falls on their head, followed by the second, the third. And sure enough, around the 8th drip, they're squirming. And they're getting flashlights, and they're searching, because you turned off all the lights and let them sit there with a drip on their head. And they start searching for the drip. Well, naturally, it's right above them, right around the hatch, and they put the two together. And then you hear them clear their voice, in a very, I don't want to be an alarmist, they commonly say. I don't want to be an alarmist. Have any of you guys notice that there's water coming in around the hatch? And our response is always, oh my God, we're going to die. And it's a lot of fun. It's a wonderful way to introduce people to Davy Jones' locker. But that is not really why I dive. It's not to torture people in a diving submarine. But for some reason, as a little boy, and you never know how these things happen, but for some reason I became fascinated early in life with mountain ranges. And I'm sure it's because I was born in Kansas where all these great mountain ranges are, but actually as we left Kansas and we came west, and I remember going to the Rocky Mountains and the Sierra Nevadas, I fell in love with mountain ranges. And so here I am growing up on the beach in San Diego as a little kid, and I start to hear that the largest mountain ranges on Earth are under the ocean. And you're going, not a chance. You're looking out at that flat, featureless horizon. How could the largest mountain ranges on Earth be down, not up? But in fact, they are. It's called the mid-ocean ridge. And we didn't know it existed in its totality until 1960. And the mid-ocean ridge runs around our planet like the seam on a baseball. And it starts its journey up in the Arctic basin. It comes down beneath Iceland, which sits astride of it. The Atlantic system is called the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, and it runs down the center of the Atlantic Ocean, makes a left-hand turn, passes into the Indian Ocean, crosses between Australia and Antarctica, enters the Pacific, constantly changing its name, but one continuous mountain range. And finally, after a journey of 42,000 miles around the Earth, it enters Baja California, makes a left-hand turn, and becomes the San Andreas Fault. Now, if you were to put this mountain range on an equal area projection, which this is a Mercator projection, as you know, Mercator projections distort high latitudes, you would find that the mid-ocean ridge covers 23% of the Earth's total surface area, yet we didn't know it existed in its totality until 1960. And we didn't go to the largest feature on Earth until after Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin went to the moon. We sent humans to the moon, we played golf up there before we went to the largest feature on our own planet, which is quite amazing. And in fact, as we sit here today, the maps we have of Mars, the present maps in the drawer of Mars are 250 times more accurate than our maps of the southern hemisphere of planet Earth. We have better maps of Mars, better maps of Venus, better maps of the far side of the moon. The Earth is truly an unexplored frontier. I like to tell young people, and we see a lot of them in the audience tonight, think about what I'm going to tell you. Your generation is going to explore more of Earth than all previous generations combined. You are the generation of explorers. And so, get ready for a great adventure. Now, my fascination in the mid-ocean ridge was not only because of its tremendous size, but the role the mid-ocean ridge plays in the genesis of the Earth's outer skin. Because it's along the axis of this seam on a baseball where the Earth creates its outer skin. Because as you know, the Earth is divided up into large slabs called plates. And these plates are in constant motion. And they do one of three things. Either the plates move away from one another, and that's what's happening along this seam on the baseball. This is where the plates are separating. Or the plates are in head-on collision in the great trenches, the great mountain-building regions, the great generators of earthquakes and tsunamis, as we've seen recently. Or they slide past one another. Now, what's interesting about the Earth is it's in constant steady state. It's not getting bigger or smaller. So if the mid-ocean ridge is generating crust, here there's a balance with its destruction. And so basically, the mid-ocean ridge is we call the boundary of creation. It's where the Earth creates its outer skin. See, I think of the Earth as a living organism, and it's very hard for people to think of the Earth as a living organism, but think of a mayfly that lives for 3 or 4 days standing on the branch of a sequoia tree in California that's 2,000 years old, and you were to interview the mayfly and say, do you perceive the object, this tree, as being alive? And the mayfly would say, you know, of course not, I've been here all my life, 3 days, and the tree hasn't done a doggone thing. You are mayflies on Earth. If you're lucky, you'll live to be 100 years, but you're on a living organism that's 4.5 billion years old, constantly evolving through time and space. And so what was fascinating about this new concept called plate tectonics, when I was a graduate student when the theory first of it was advanced, and no one had ever been into the boundary of creation. No one had actually gone down inside this great rift until a team of us in the summer of 1973, 1974, actually got in submarines and went down into the boundary of creation. And this is a characterization, accurate, no vertical exaggeration. The only thing inaccurate about this image is it should be pitch black. Pitch black, because most of our Earth is beneath the sea, most of our Earth is deep beneath the sea, and as a result, most of the Earth has never felt the warmth of the sun. Most of our planet is in eternal darkness. And because it's in eternal darkness, photons, that life-giving bundle of energy that comes off the reactors of the sun, flying through space at the speed of light, come into our atmosphere, and are caught by the chlorophyll of plants, and that bundle of energy is what drives the carbon-based system that we've been taught in our textbooks. So when we knew that, having taken those courses in school, when we began diving in the mid-ocean ridge and we didn't see a lot of life, we accepted it as a given. We said, of course, the sun cannot get down here. There's no real way of bringing sunlight down, so there shouldn't be any plants. There's no photosynthesis in the dark. In fact, the only source of food, we thought, was the little animals that die in the sunlit layer, up in the euphotic zone, the plankton, the phytoplankton, and zooplankton. They die, and they rain down to the ocean floor. We call it marine snow. But the marine snow, the rate of marine snow is very, very sparse. It's a centimeter in the deep sea per 1,000 years. Not only is it a slow snowfall, those particles, which we call marine snow, that when we turn on our lights are all around us, those little bodies are eaten 6 to 8 times on the way down. We call it the fecal express. Okay? And so when that last guy finally makes it, there's not a whole lot of nutrients. So we say, well, yeah, that's why we have a fish here and a fish there. We don't have much going on. We have all this volcanic activity, but we don't have life. And we sort of, we're accepting that until we made a phenomenal discovery off the Galapagos Islands on a branch of this mountain range. And like most great discoveries, we weren't looking for what we found. We were looking for something else. What were we looking for? Well, we knew that along this entire mountain range were undersea volcanoes. There are tens of thousands. When those plates separate, the blood of the earth comes up in the form of molten magma, flows out, and we have all these volcanoes, active volcanoes. If you get out in the mid-ocean ridge, you can go for 42,000 miles of continuous active volcanoes. Again, another thing you don't think about. The most common rock on the surface of the earth is pillow lavas. The most common rock on the earth is lavas. And we don't see it, and when we walk out the door, so we don't think about it. But beneath the sea, you can go for 42,000 miles from one active volcano to the next. And we know what's beneath active volcanoes: magma chambers. And so we say, well, wait a minute. We've got a magma chamber here. We've got the earth pulling apart, creating cracks. Water's going to go down to that magma chamber and come back up in the form of hot springs, much like you have in Yellowstone Park. What many people don't know is Yellowstone is one of the largest volcanoes, active volcanoes on Earth. It's a mega volcano, 40-kilometer caldera. It's covered in trees. You don't see it very often, and it doesn't go off very often. Yellowstone goes off about every 200,000 years. But the last time it went off, it took out a third of the United States. Wait till the Weather Channel starts hyping that one, okay? And here's the point. The last time it went off was 200,000 years ago. So Yellowstone's due. This is why I moved from California to New England, okay? But we know that beneath Yellowstone is this big magma chamber. We know that water melts, snow melts, it goes down, it gets heated by that magma chamber, and it flashes. And it comes up in the form of Old Faithful and Castle Geyser and Beehive Geyser. I know many of you have been to Yellowstone, gone to Upper Geyser Basin, and you see all of those guys going off. That's driven by that magma chamber and water. So we said, well, why wouldn't we have the same thing under the ocean? We may not flash because of the pressure, but we should be able to go down and find super hot water. And we went hunting for it. And sure enough, going along the valley in our submarine, we looked out the window and we saw these big, giant chimneys with this black smoke blasting out of them. And we went up to them because the water was going down, getting heated by the magma chamber, coming back up, but it couldn't flash. It was just super hot. We didn't know how hot it was till we went up with our submarine. Never forget, we went up with our submarine, a little temperature probe. And we stuck the temperature probe in the chimney and looked at the thing and went, and pegged off scale. And our pilot made this great scientific observation: that's hot. Okay? And then he lifted the temperature sensor out, and it had melted. And he said, he whispered in my ear, Bob, our windows are made out of the same stuff. And then I whispered in his ear, do you have a reverse? It turned out that the exiting temperature out of those black smokers was 650 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt lead. And here's what a real one looks like. This is a real black smoker on the Juan de Fuca Ridge. Give you a sense of scale, that would be my height right there. That's about 6 feet. So this is 12 foot tall. These are giant pipe organs, and everything you see here is commercial grade ore. Copper, lead, silver, zinc, and gold in commercial concentrations along that entire mountain range. 42,000 miles of heavy metal deposits. So tremendous economic potential once we figure out how to bring it up. But it has tremendous potential. But that discovery was dwarfed by what we found living in and around these underwater smokers. And it was a profusion of exotic life. Life in great concentration, 10 times more concentrated than the biota in the sunlit layers 8,000 feet above us. Characterized by a particular worm, a giant worm that was about 8 to 10 feet tall. And I remember bringing this up, and like most amazing expeditions, we didn't have the right scientists aboard. We were all looking for water. We weren't looking for animals, so we had no biologists on the expedition. And I'll never forget getting on the satellite phone, calling back to Woods Hole, saying, I got this 10-foot worm. And they said, no, you don't. I said, no, I got it right here. I got a 10-foot worm. What should I do with it? And the biologist got on the say, said, put it in formaldehyde. And I said, well, geologists don't lug a lot of formaldehyde. And they said, do you have any scotch? And I went, now that's a low blow. We were out there for 2 months, and you know, they said, well, pickle it in bourbon, scotch, whatever you got. And as chief scientist, I had to go around and collect everyone's bottle of booze to pickle a 10-foot worm. And they said, next time, bring up a 2-foot worm. Okay, but what was amazing about these worms is if you cut them, they bled human-like blood. Human-like blood. In fact, around these giant clusters of tube worms, on the barren lava were clams. Clams, and these were not small clams. These were giant clams. And we brought them up, and we then went to open them. And everyone knows what a clam looks like, right? Get ready. That is disgusting. Now, it looks like liver, and I never like eating pumps and filters. This has human-like blood in it, and it has a strong smell of hydrogen sulfide. In fact, that was the key. It had this pungent smell of rotten eggs. And then when we dissected this clam, we got a knife and we started dissecting it, expecting to see the anatomy of a clam. It had no mouth, no gut, no digestive system. It did not have the anatomy of a clam. In fact, another creature had completely taken over its body. A bacterium, a heat-loving bacterium, a thermophilic bacterium that had figured out over eons of time how to replicate photosynthesis in the dark through a process we've now coined as chemosynthesis, where its life-giving energy was not the sun, not the photons from the sun, but the chemical energy of the earth itself. We discovered a whole new life form, a whole new life form that has revolutionized our thinking on the origin of life on this planet and the probability of finding it elsewhere, even within our own solar system. So those of you that have trouble being related to a monkey, try this. All right. And what was so amazing, there was just a hot period of time in the 70s where we were just making discovery after discovery after discovery. And our primary search tool was using the submarine. Well, I said, well, this is not going to work because, as I said, the average depth of the ocean is 12,000 feet. So just on a normal dive day, it was taking me 2.5 hours to get down to work in the morning and 2.5 hours to get home at night. I had a 5-hour commute to work. And my average bottom time was 3.5 hours. My average distance traveled was a mile. And I've got a 42,000-mile mountain range to look at, and I'm clicking off a mile a day. Great job security, but, you know, frustrating. So after doing this for 20 years, I punched out. I went to Stanford. I was teaching geophysics at Stanford, and I wandered over to the engineering lab, and they were messing around with some new stuff. I said, what do you got? And they said, well, this is a laser. I said, well, you know, walk me through that. What are you doing? We're using it to move it through fiber optic. Well, walk me through that. They said, well, you guys use copper, right? Yeah. And you're moving electricity through, you're moving electrons through copper. Yep, that's what we do. What's the bandwidth? What's the best kind of image you can get up from the bottom? And we said, pretty lousy. We had what's called, to give you a sense of people that aren't into bandwidth, think of bandwidth as a pipe, okay? And we were using a garden hose. We were moving information through a garden hose at 5 megahertz of bandwidth. Well, the best we could get up our cables, our copper cables back then, was a black and white, fuzzy, slow sync TV camera. Nothing at all competitive to the Mark I eyeball looking out of a window of a submarine. But then they said, no, you can throw that away. You're going to move from electrons to photons. You're going to move from a rare metal of copper to the most common element in the universe, silicon. And we're going to move 600 megahertz through that pipe. So we're going to go from a garden hose to a storm pipe. And I said, well, now I like that. With that, I could then create a telepresence. And so I moved away from physically going to the bottom of the ocean, it was just not practical, to moving robots. So I published this cartoon in National Geographic magazine in the December 1981 issue. That's 24 years ago. I published this in the magazine as my dream. And I pulled it off this last summer. It took me 24 years to pull it off. But anyway, the concept behind it was to create a robotic device that had everything my submarine had except me. Not, well, some of me. I wanted my eyes down there. I wanted my mind down there. I wanted my hands down there. I definitely did not want my gallbladder and kidneys and any of that down there. But the idea was, could I have, and again, one of my other things as a kid was a Star Trek. I always thought it was cool when Scotty beamed Captain Kirk down. And I said, well, what if you could beam me down, Scotty? So the idea was to use fiber optics to create a telepresence where I could have an operating system not controlled from inside the robot, but from the deck of the ship. If I could create a laboratory, or a studio, basically, you'll see it in a minute. You walk into it, you turn it on, and the plasmas become your windows, and you think you're down there. The beauty of that is if you could pull it off, then you don't have to cycle your vehicle system. So you don't have to make this silly transit. Put the vehicle down at the beginning of the expedition, leave it down, and then stay down for weeks to months on end. And remembering how many discoveries I've made where I didn't have the expert aboard, the concept was, well, then I'll network an expert with a satellite link. So the idea was, go explore, get down there, great discoveries, then network scientists down so that the expert is here while sitting here. And like I say, I just pulled that off finally, and I'll show it to you in a second. So anyway, I got this, started building this system, and the first test of this system, the first chance I had, so we had an engineering period from about 1982 to 1985, and we were ready to go to sea. And we decided that we wanted to do something that would demonstrate to the public we'd entered a new era of undersea exploration, so we said, let's take on the Titanic. Our competitors at Scripps, at Lamont, at Columbia University had tried and failed. It was our turn in the puddle, and we went out, and as you know, during the summer of 1985, discovered Titanic in its watery grave, and then came back with our little vehicle, our first little robot. We called our robot, the one we wanted to build, Jason, in memory of Jason and the Argonauts. But we didn't have the big one ready in the summer of 1986, so we built a little one we called it Jason Jr., or JJ. And JJ stole the show. We went down, looked in the windows, went down the grand staircase. More recently, we went back with a new vehicle, Hercules, exploring the Titanic again, in high def this time, comparing what we'd seen 20 years ago to what we're seeing now. And here we are. This was just the last summer on the Titanic. This is where Leonardo was standing right here, the king of the world. But it was amazing. It was like a museum. The deep sea is a giant museum. What was fascinating not only was the ship itself, but the human element. Children always ask me, what happens to the bodies? They want to know where the bodies go. Well, naturally, the Titanic had a tremendous loss of life, and we can never forget that. And the bodies came raining down and landed. As soon as they land, animals find them, just like if you died in the woods, and the animals eat them. And they expose the skeleton. And there's an interesting thing about the deep sea is it's undersaturated in calcium carbonate and the bones dissolve. So all you have as a human signature are their shoes. Every ship I've ever found, I have found shoes, pairs of shoes, where the body used to be. In Germany, and with Bismarck, it was German boots. In my ancient ships, sandals. On the Lusitania, a mother with her baby's shoes together. The poignant memory that these are very special places. And as you know, I've been deeply opposed to recovery of artifacts from these sites because I don't see anything to be learned from contemporary sites. Certainly archaeological sites is another issue. And as you'll see in a minute, I want to wire them up. I want to create an underwater Gettysburg. I want to create the ability to go and visit these sites through telepresence, and we're going to do it. But what was the most interesting thing, I think, about our discovery of the Titanic was the reaction I got from children. It caught me by surprise, because I thought, you know, that's a long time ago. Why would kids be interested? I have done 116 expeditions in the ocean. Titanic was my 70th expedition. And we had done some pretty cool stuff. Helped prove the concept of plate tectonics, helped find the origin of life on Earth. Not bad stuff, you know. But I never got a letter from a child till I found a rusty old ship. And then I was inundated with letters from children. In fact, the first month back, we got 16,000 letters from children. American kids, all saying the same thing. What do I have to do what you do? Because kids of today are, this is a giant video game. We play the biggest reality video game on the planet. And these kids are tuned to this technology. This is their technology. And they saw an R2, they didn't see an R2-D2 or a CP3O. They saw a JJ, and it was real. And kids just locked in on what we were doing because they saw it as their future. And so they wanted to know, what do I have to do what you do? Simple. Go to college. You study physics for 10 years. Slam dunk after that, kids. It's a slam dunk. Okay. Well, kids are not necessarily putting those two things together. The fun I have, and I have a heck of a lot of fun, but the dues I had to pay. The second thing the kids said, next time you go, can I go with you? And we thought, well, wait a minute. Let's go back to our design paradigm. We were going to network scientists. Why can't we just network kids as well? So we said, well, let's set up a program. We set it up called the Jason Project. And every year since, we've been going out on expeditions. And Ed Zander is right over here from Motor. Ed Zander has been with us on the Jason board. I want to thank Ed for coming and the great support that he and Motorola have given our project, because we were able to convince people like Ed and Riley Bechtel and others that the game for a scientist, the battlefield for a scientist and engineer in this country is in middle school. The game's over by the 8th grade. You got them or you ain't got them. Math is still in this country, one of the most popular classes in the 4th grade, least popular by the 10th. That's the precipitous dropout. We brag about our universities, which we should brag about. We got the greatest universities in the world, and how foreign students try to get into our schools. The real badge of courage for this nation is when foreign kids are trying to get into our middle schools, and they're not. We should take as a national objective to have the finest middle schools on this planet. And that should be our real objective, because that will guarantee our competitiveness in the future. Thank you. Now, so what we do is we go out on these great events. Look at this new control system. I love, that's my control van right now. What a video game that is. And we go out with a television. I remember, in fact, how I met my wife, Barbara, when I had this idea of doing this Jason program. I went to Gil Grosvenor at National Geographic. I was hosting every Sunday night to Explorer on television. And I went to Gil, and they sent me over to television division. I met a young woman named Barbara Earl, and became my wife. And I talked to Barbara about how I wanted to use live television programming. She says, well, you know, you really need to, Geographic doesn't do live shows, but we work a lot with Ted Turner with TBS on the Explorer show, and they do a lot of live shows. So why don't you go down to Atlanta, and they introduced me, set up a meeting with Ted Turner. What a hoot. But anyway, I went down, I met Ted, and I explained to him what I wanted to do. And he said, you know, you need to go down the hall and talk to our WWF guys. And I went, WWF? He said, what's that? He said, World Wrestling Federation guys. They do live television, you know. I said, do I really have to? But anyway, I went down the hall and I met Bud and Bill, okay, doing the WWF program. And I described to them what I wanted to do for live programming to children. Tears started coming down their face. They said, please take us out of here. All right. For the next 12 years on my team, every time they misbehaved, I said, I'm sending you back to the WWF. But the idea behind it was to take the same technology that we use to do live sporting events, to feature an athlete running up and down on grass for some reason, and try to replace that athlete with a student and a teacher and a scientist who are committed to the real game, and that's the pursuit of truth, and to take them and make them heroes. We're a star-based system in this country. We're proud of individualism, but we tend to take it a little too far. We have star this, star that, star that. We need to have star teachers and star students and star scientists as role models for our children. And so that's what we want to do. That's what we want to do. So we go out and we do exciting things. We put it on a satellite and we beam it back to kids. And the price of admission is they have to take a science class in school and study a tough curriculum. It's standard-based, you know, no child left behind, all that jazz, but physics is physics, F equals MA. And what we wanted to do was to get them to study harder in school. This year, in our Jason program, we've signed up 1.7 million American kids into the program and 20,000 middle school science teachers to teach this, and that's the battle we got to win. Now, what's interesting, too, is I've also recently expanded it to the Boys and Girls Clubs of America, to the after-school programs, because the latchkey kids, the kids that are at risk. I remember giving a presentation to the Boys and Girls Clubs about wanting to do this for kids that are, you know, at risk. And I remember a police officer in Minnesota says, "You deal with the easy kids at the Jason Project. I deal with the gangs." And he says, "I'm going to try your program." And sure enough, he did a testimonial at the Department of Justice just last week saying it works. I got those gang kids involved in exploration. It's amazing. And what we're trying to do is to take them, introduce them to the excitement, and get the jaw drop. If you can get this out of a child, you can put any amount of information into that brain. And that's our goal, is to use the excitement of exploration to reach large numbers of kids. We take them with us as our role models, we put them into the battlefield, and they're great, great, great role models. Second thing I want to talk about was after finding the Titanic, I realized the deep sea was a museum, and I sort of went on a binge, and I found the Bismarck, and I went and found the Yorktown. People always ask you, how do you know you found the right ship? Well, this one said Yorktown on the stern, so I was sure about that one. But you know, a scientist has a bad habit of always asking the next question, and the next question was, so what? These are steel ships. They've been down for less than 100 years. Sure, they're going to be there. What about the ancient mariner? What about the ancient mariner? And how many of these ships that have been plying the seas as wooden ships for thousands of years, how many of them have had a bad day? The answer is 1 million. And I got to think, my God, 1 million ships of antiquity? Where are they? And I started looking for them. And I realized that the field of marine archaeology is very young, and it only uses scuba diving technology. Marine archaeology, since the 50s, has been limited to a couple hundred feet of water. I mean, my gosh, a couple hundred feet of water is the width of that red dot along the northern coast of Africa. What about the deeper parts of the Mediterranean? Average depth in the Mediterranean, 9,000 feet. Off of Greece approaches 20,000 feet. So I said, I want to go in there and see if I can find the ancient mariner that is far from shore. And who am I looking for? Well, this is a good trading ship, a Carthaginian trading ship. I picked a Carthage to Rome trade route. And I said, okay, let's look at these ships. What are they carrying? Well, naturally, they're carrying, you know, lions and tigers and bears to eat the Christians in the Colosseum, but they're also carrying lots of wine. Because Carthage became a breadbasket to Rome. After the Punic Wars and the Romans vanquished the Carthaginians, this became the breadbasket, and they were sending wine across to Rome. And I said, well, let me see. If I want to find a trade route, I was convinced somewhere in here was a deep water trade route. So I said, let's go looking for it. So here's my strategy. Here's how wonderful science is. I said, what am I looking for? Well, I'm looking for a ship that had 3,000 bottles of wine on it. What would you do on a 5-day journey if you had 3,000 bottles of wine below decks? Right? You'd hit the sauce, right? What would you do with the empty wine bottle? Chuck it, right? Now remember, the rate of sedimentation of the deep sea is a centimeter per 1,000 years? And these guys on their side, these amphoras, are about 18 inches on their side. Well, you can't bury them. Now what's the main highway through Chicago here? What's the I-94. Imagine I-94 without an adopt-a-highway program for 2,000 years. What would it look like? What would I-90, what would it, no AAA coming up and picking up the cars and all that. So here's what I did, is I said, I'm going to go, oops, back up. I'm going to go, and I'm looking for a trade route here, but I'm going to go perpendicular to it and see if I can pick up Roman empties. All right? Gotta, you know, ain't science great. But anyway, I said, I'm going to start in Cagliari, and I'm going to go all the way over to the Trapani in Sicily, and I'm going to look for Roman empties. And I went for 100 miles. I didn't see a single Roman empty until I hit a narrow corridor, 4 miles wide, with thousands of empties. They drank all the way to Rome. And within those empties, I found my first Roman ship. And this is as discovered from the 1st century BC. Just sitting there, just sitting there. Look at that. And that's this thin dusting, and that's as discovered. You'll notice the ship is gone because of the wood borers that eat it, the termites. So we come in, then we map it, and we create a mosaic. Here's a ship I found off of Egypt from the time of Homer, 750 BC. 750, and this is it with the ship missing. This is the shape of the ship. Here's the bow. There's the high-tech anchor, a rock with a hole in it. But that was, nothing's broken. It went down that soft. But the ship is gone because the wood borers are there to eat the wood, just like they ate the deck of the Titanic. Well, there's a place on Earth where the wood borers don't live, and that's in the Black Sea, where I am right now. I'll be there this summer. Stay tuned. But anyway, why am I going to the Black Sea? Well, a little geography. Here I found my Carthaginian ships here. I found my Phoenician ships here. I'm working in the Sea of Crete right now with a wonderful program between Knossos and Santorini, looking for Minoans. But I'm also going up into the Black Sea. I'll be working off the Crimea all summer. And why? Because the Black Sea is a giant body of salt water, but it's stratified, and it doesn't have any oxygen below 200 meters. Only the upper layer has oxygen. From 200 meters to 2,000 meters, it's the largest reservoir of hydrogen sulfide on Earth. It's completely anoxic. It has no wood borers. It has no termites. Theoretically, the most preserved ships of ancient antiquity should be in that bucket of water. But we couldn't get in there during the Cold War. It was a Soviet bucket of water. I don't know what you were thinking when the Berlin Wall came down. I said, I'm going to the Black Sea. That's what I said. All right. That was the dividend I was looking for. And I was the first person to search the deep waters of the Black Sea. I knew that there was a Greek colony here in Sinope, and the major trading center of the Greeks were at Chersonesus on the southern tip of the Crimea. And I went hunting, and sure enough, I bumped into the mast of a ship. Now, wood lasts a year and a half, so this ship, if it sank anywhere else, would have to be less than a year and a half old. But it was much, much older. We dropped down to the base of the mast, and it was sticking out of the soft mud, and we took a core sample into the mast. It was 1,500-year-old ship. It was a Byzantine ship. We then came back, built a beautiful vehicle system, and went back to do a test excavation, which we did 2 summers ago. And we went down and we excavated with our technology, with our vehicles up here, and we went in. Here's our beautiful command center aboard the ship. And we saw this artifact sticking out. Here was the mast we took the core out of. Here's the side of the ship. This is the starboard side of the ship with the main beams. We saw that little handle. We said, there's cargo here, and we began excavating it. And sure enough, now watch what happens. This is one of my favorite next pictures. Here is this beam of the ship, 1,500 years old, covered with the fuzz of that time. And we clean it off, and look, you can see the carpenter's ad mark. They didn't have saws. They had a tool called an ad where they whacked off the beams. These are our lasers for 10 centimeters. Perfectly preserved wood would be absolute Swiss cheese anywhere else. We started to recover the artifacts. Look at the artifacts. They still have beeswax drippings on them. They still have perfectly preserved organics. In fact, if we continue excavating, we'll start pulling out the crew. And they will be perfectly mummified human specimens, like the bog people of Scotland. Absolutely perfectly mummified. Huge ethical issues, and just a little piece of hair that will get their DNA. Now, after doing this, we just formed this new program at the university. I'm recruiting for a few minutes. All right, kids, you want to be in the game? You're going to come and be a graduate student of mine, right? All right? All right. You're going to get a degree in archaeological oceanography. Now, what is that? You're going to get a PhD in oceanography, okay? You're going to get a PhD in oceanography, so you have to do math, physics, and chemistry, okay? Not a problem, right? But you also have to get a degree in archaeology, so I want you to also study your Greek and Roman classics. I just got 6 students that fill the bill. 6 students that are schizophrenic and actually have this double major. And we're going to do some serious damage next summer. All right, the final thing, and then we'll wrap it up, take some questions. I was asked to serve on a commission by the President and Congress on the Ocean Commission. And one of the wonderful things about being the Ocean Commissioner is you get to write some of the stuff. And I have been so upset about our ocean exploration program and how underfunded it is. It's just peanuts. Our nation's ocean exploration program this fiscal year is a grand total of $13 million to explore the oceans of the world. Good luck. Anyway, we did steal a ship, though. I was able to steal a ship from the Navy, and it's now up in the Todd Shipyard in Seattle. It's been renamed by children, called the Okeanos Explorer, which is Greek for Ocean Explorer. And I'm putting its mission, kids, this ship's mission. Want to hear a mission? This ship's mission is to go where no one has ever gone before on planet Earth. And it'll be at sea starting August of 2007. It'll be going to sea for 250 days a year. It'll have the most advanced technology our nation can put on it. It'll be linked from our command center back to a building via satellite. I just convinced the people of Rhode Island on a bond issue to build America's first inner space center, what Houston has for outer space. This inner space center is under construction. It will be linked to the ship 24 hours a day. And when we make a discovery, we'll take it from the scientists, will be on Internet 2. Is our prime distribution system. Internet 2 is something that's going to enter your lives and revolutionize. If you think Internet 1 had an impact upon society, buckle up. Internet 2 is in the universities, and it's about to spill out. It's spilling out into the schools. Internet 2, I2, go Google it, makes Internet 1 look like a dirt road on the information highway. It has a bandwidth of 10 gigabits. And we're going to travel electronically with this technology. And here we have, this is an expedition. Remember that vision I had of the scientist? This scientist is running our expedition this summer, and there's the chief scientist, Deb Kelly, and her team, operating the system. There's our pilot. Oh, by the way, they're 4,000 miles apart. And she's in Seattle, Washington, in complete control of the ship's operation on this Internet 2, and we're also then using it to distribute it to kids. And what we want to do with this exciting technology is turn schools into classrooms of tomorrow, hooked up to this ship of exploration, and I can't think of a better way than motivating the next generation of scientists and engineers by going where no one has ever gone before on planet Earth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ballard. As is our custom, we've prepared a few questions, and I think with all that technology, my first one would be, maybe you could find Osama bin Laden.
That's all right.
Okay.
But I'll take the money.
Yeah, 25 million will go a long way.
Yeah, they go a long way.
One of the first questions, and I think I know the answer to this, but we'd like to hear your response anyway. Do you believe that space exploration has received a disproportionately large amount of federal resources compared to ocean exploration? And if so, why?
Well, if you look at NASA, I love NASA. You know, I think NASA's underfunded. It's a wonderful program. But if you look at NASA's program to explore the moons of Saturn, just one element of their annual budget to explore the moons of Saturn would support America's ocean exploration budget for 350 years. Is that out of whack? You bet it is. Do you know that half of our country is beneath the sea? 50% of the land we own and control is under the ocean. Let that sink in. When President Reagan signed the exclusive economic zone, he doubled the size of the country with a stroke of a pen, and there wasn't a shot heard around the world. It just went by. We have so much resources beneath the sea that we haven't even looked at. And so, yes, we're grossly underfunded. In fact, this last FY06 budget, they took the ocean exploration program and they cut it in half, from 23 million to 12 and a half. Great job.
Okay, got another one. You've chosen to partner principally with for-profit television, like National Geographic Explorer on TBS, rather than public television in presenting your work. Do you think that leads to sensationalism?
Well, first place, National Geographic is a nonprofit. I mean,
I didn't write the question.
I know. I mean, I love PBS and I love National Geographic. Yes, there's a tremendous tendency for sensationalism, and it's a disease this nation has at all levels. That we just got to get away from this way of motivating kids by scaring the living hell out of them. And that's just not the way to do it. We need to inspire, not frighten. And I think too much of our programming frightens and doesn't inspire. Other than that, I don't have an opinion.
Are other countries exploring the oceans to a lesser or greater extent than the U.S. is?
Per capita, France and Japan are much further into the game than we are. The good news is the future competitors who we're most worried about, China and India, have no expertise to speak of in the oceans. In fact, we need to use that as an edge. China and India have no mastery of the deep sea. We do. We have the ability to explore 72% of the planet, to enter in bilateral agreements with other nations who have exclusive economic zones. We have a tremendous potential to be the world's greatest leader in ocean exploration and exploitation. And we're not playing that card.
What's the most surprising thing you've ever found underwater?
A 10-foot worm. I often say, I have a better answer for kids. Kids say, what's the most important discovery you've ever made? And it's the one I'm about to make. Because this summer, when we go into the Aegean and look for the Minoans or the sea peoples, I've fallen in love with the Bronze Age. Because the Bronze Age is a wonderful time where archaeology mixes with legend, and there's, the science can really push it back. And I'm very, very excited about working in the Aegean, and particularly between Crete and Santorini. And I just got my permits, which were not easy, and I'm working now with the Greek government, and stay tuned for that one, as well as the work off the Crimea in June.
Okay, I'm going to give you one more opportunity to pitch the youth here. Because many of them will, of course, be inspired by what you had to say tonight, and because you probably won't discover everything or all 1 million ships that are out there, if they actually put in the 10 years in physics, etc.
And Greek and Roman classics.
And Greek and Roman classics, where would you tell them to start their list searching, and what would they search for? What's on your list that you're not going to get to that they ought to?
Well, I'd be lucky if I'm hoping to get Minoans, the sea peoples. I think what I'm really after is pushing back our knowledge of ancient history as far as I can. I'm confident that the largest museum on Earth is in the ocean. I hope that this generation enters the ocean not to plunder it, but to appreciate it, and to make great discoveries not only on planet Earth. I'd love to see some of them off to Europa, exploring that ocean, looking for the life we think may exist in the ocean of Europa, which most people don't even know Europa has an ocean. Most people don't even know where Europa is, but it's a moon of Jupiter. And we think it has an ocean that's 60 miles deep, 10 times deeper than ours, and that it should have active volcanoes, and it should have life. And I ain't going to make it to Europa, but they are.
Great. Well, thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Ballard.